Okay, welcome to Funnel Lab Fridays. Funnel Lab Fridays is sort of our weekly LinkedIn live session where we dive into use cases and challenges, primarily for data savvy marketers. I'm your host, Eric Westerkamp, CEO here at CaliberMind. And today I have Misha and Doug, who have both been on the show here before. And we're going to be talking about using marketing decision engines to optimize B2B multi-channel models. And I think we'll kind of kick it off today with Doug. Maybe you can kind of set us up a little bit. What is sort of B2B multi-channel growth models? And why are we talking about that rather than say your kind of classic B2B marketing funnel? Like, what's the difference between a multi-channel growth model and a B2B funnel that people are kind of relatively used to?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think we should also talk about what is a marketing decision engine. So let me sort of break this into pieces. The first thing is, what is this idea of a decision engine? And the best way I can describe it is it's a set of data pulled together in a single environment, typically a combination of attribution data, funnels data, and engagement data that allows marketers to have insights into what's performing well and what's not performing well to make good decisions. The reason we're sort of talking about this idea of a multi-channel model, and I'm going to say the underlying model is an engagement model versus the classic funnel is, for the most part, large clients, large enterprises have moved off the funnel model, and you're talking about much more complexity in the model that you're having to think about. So specifically, I think it was our first Funnel Lab Friday, we talked about ROI, and we talked about how each channel can be measured for ROI. But I think we know, Misha, certainly from your helping customers, and Eric as the CEO here, quite often it's not that simple. And a multi-channel model typically says that each channel plays a separate role in the funnel, if you will. In this case, engagement funnel, not lead funnel or account funnel. So a good example is you're going to see, let's use Facebook. You're going to see Facebook actually have and drive a lot of activity, but quite often Facebook is not the way that somebody's going to go purchase a product, especially a complex B2B product. However, Facebook has a lot of utility because what it can do in a multi-channel model setting is it can create awareness that they otherwise would not have had. And so if we think about a complex B2B multi-channel model, we're talking about is what type of roles do each channel play in that model? And then how does a marketing decision engine help you sort of optimize that activity across the funnel?
Interesting.
Yeah, because what you're saying is that a model that looks through the entire funnel might not be granular enough for decision making, and that marketers are getting more sophisticated with the moment in the buyer journey within which they're trying to get insights. Is that along the lines of what you're alluding to?
That's absolutely right. And it's also another way of saying that, the buyer's journey. So look, we marketers are simple folks. We don't want complexity, right? We want one channel to produce pipeline. We want one channel to produce bookings. That is not the case because guess what? The buyers don't want to talk to us, right? They want to wait till the absolute last minute to engage with us, meaning the sellers and marketers. And so they do everything they can to sort of navigate around the process to the point they have to talk to us. And they're really savvy shoppers. They're incredibly savvy shoppers. So if we look at our buyer journey at CaliberMind, and we see these things are sometimes a year long,
right?
Not the buying cycle, but the actual buyer journey. And we see that it'll start and it'll surge and it'll surge, and then suddenly we'll see them sort of show up and be like, okay, I want to deal with a seller or a marketer, right? In most cases, seller. Well, geez, along that way, each channel plays a very, very different role. And quite often for us, as an example, we talked about this before, G2 is the entry point, right? If you think about G2 and the role it's playing for a lot of B2B SaaS companies, people are Googling, I need this product. In this case, let's say it's attribution. Well, guess what? You're seeing a lot of paid links and not a lot of credibility with the links that are showing up. So where do they start? They start with G2. It's the most credible place. And they come back and they come back and they come back. But we also see them on Facebook. We see them showing up on our website. We see them showing up on LinkedIn. And so how do you manage that incredibly complex multi-stage journey? And that's really what MDE, I think, in this conversation, that's where I see MDE playing an important role.
So that's super interesting because when you think about attribution, attribution itself, while very powerful, doesn't really capture that top of the funnel activity very well. And so how do you see an MDE playing into, and Misha, you're working with a lot of our customers and all, where does the MDE play in helping customers see sort of a lot of these buyer journeys happening before anything enters into, it has an opportunity where it would actually even create attribution?
Yeah, it's interesting. We see this journey with attribution where, for many of our customers, high frequency events get a lot of attribution.
Yeah.
And so you often get this answer from attribution models of, well, send more emails, triple the number of email sends, right? Or you get these big buckets of high frequency events. And while those, of course, affect probably almost every buyer journey, right?
Yeah.
Probably will interact to some degree with your web content or email. There's those are, they're, first of all, they're free, essentially, right? And so it's very easy, I think, to fall into this trap of, let's see. And I think companies are starting to recognize this, and they want to really feel, well, what levers can I control? And so very quickly, it goes from that to, but wait, maybe the line in the sand shouldn't be op creation, but rather something earlier. What kind of events do I see that could even generate initial interest?
Right.
And all of a sudden, you're not looking at attribution anymore. You might be looking at, search or engagement scoring. And even within that, you might even be looking at a model that looks at intent versus a model that looks at engagement with your organization. So there's this like multi-model thing that's happening that I'm seeing with more and more customers.
Yeah.
That looking at attribution in a vacuum isn't good enough because they know there's more nuances. Looking at engagement historically has been a sales tool isn't good enough. It doesn't help me answer the marketing motions. But when you start combining the two, almost we spoke about these multiple axes, you get really interesting insights. And all of a sudden you can do interesting segmentation.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. This account is showing high intent, but actually low engagement with me. Well, interesting. I have a set of campaigns that's been effective for these groups of accounts.
Sure.
So is this idea then, Misha, what I'm hearing from you is back to the pillars.
Yeah.
You've got engagement data, you've got, let's call it conversion or account activity data.
Sure.
Measured in a way that we can understand its progression, call that funnels. And then we have attribution. So what I'm hearing from you is that although this sounds like a lot, really at the end of the day, each of those different funnels has a very different role that provides a tremendous amount of insight across the buyer journey. And you sort of, Eric, you talked about this. Sort of the attribution piece is the trailing indicator. Hey, here are all the things that allowed me to have a successful event, opportunity or bookings, if you will. But what I'm hearing from you is, no, in fact, what's happening is engagement data actually sort of lays out that buyer journey to which marketers can react. But that's this idea of, hey, what are they doing? What's happening? And then funnels is about efficiency. And at the end of the day, it's what did that collection of things do? The buyer journey plus its efficiency, land and attribution. And what I'm hearing is that marketers now can cycle through each of those data sets and see how each channel sort of activates and help get to that end state.
Yeah, that's right. And zoom in, right? Because historically it's been, well, attribution, it seems like moved from a proving value of an organization to now trying to be a more tactical tool. And I think that's awesome, but there are gaps in that because you're right, dark funnel is not part of that. Sometimes a movement of a bunch of initial engagement to qualified accounts is terrific. And you want to do more of that, but that might not reflect in your attribution data at all. So I think the ability to zoom in to a portion of the funnel or certain types of engagements and answer what would be, proper follow-up or what campaigns have been effective here, because they're often very different. Your comment on G2 is a really good one. So it's really interesting how we see that pattern start a lot of this intent and data comes up early, either intent through Bambora or G2. And then people seem to, I don't know, mature to maybe start looking at actual, well, what are the proper solutions now that I know I need that?
And G2, I think is a good example of what I call validation. In other words, I'm checking, and we see this again on our funnel all the time. I'm checking to make sure you're the company I want to talk to. And you see sort of repetition across that journey. Right. And so, then we're starting to get into these nuances of what creates engagement versus what validates that engagement.
It's also interesting because when I think about this, G2 is very important to us as an organization and to a lot of organizations as SaaS companies that are kind of our SaaS. But then when I look at a lot of our customers, though, are, $20, $30 billion. I mean, they're big organizations. G2 means nothing to them. right? So how do you see this changing when you kind of scale this up to larger organizations where those types of motions probably are as important, but we see a lot of activities that are happening on the attribution tables that are more like a telemarketing team, and events and all of these other types of channels that are out there. Like, how do you see those kind of playing into this model where you need a combination of attribution to tell you kind of what was working and the value of it, but you need engagement up here to kind of tell you much more actively what's happening right now and what's kind of moving the needle.
I have to say, it's a really good point to make, which is in many ways, as a smaller organization, our buyer journey is a little bit less complex.
Yeah.
The other thing is that we do tend to have singular buyer journeys. When you're getting to larger organizations, you have multiple different product sets, multiple different business units. And it's hard enough for a small organization to help manage a multi-channel model. As you start getting to bigger and bigger organizations, it's the same problem. You're just talking about how do I measure each of those different buyer journeys, whether that's product-based, right? Whether that's national, right? Whatever it is, but it's the same problem. It's just at scale.
Yeah, and the importance of a clean, a large enough and wide enough data set that allows you to say, I know that commercial accounts don't act the same as enterprise accounts. And so being able to slice and segment the data and get insights for a specific subset, I think becomes very, very important.
Right.
For those organizations. You just see very different behaviors. You can still spot patterns. And I think that we've seen, a lot of our customers use, things like scoring in parallel with attribution because they do see a lot of value in this unified view. But another example of this is changing account granularity. You have accounts and, you have regional accounts, and then you have kind of group them. You might look at insights, what works regionally, but when you expand the buyer committee and you realize that some accounts, particularly enterprises, work much more broadly, you all of a sudden see different patterns. It's interesting.
So to answer the original question, Eric, you asked about where do we see this headed? I'm going to quote Forrester. I'm not going to name the analyst, but 2 years ago, Forrester declared the MQL dead. And part of what they were saying, that's a very antagonistic statement, right? But it was an accurate statement because what they were saying was the classic lead funnel no longer works. Back to the original premise here, which is that it's difficult to manage a multi-channel buyer journey. A lead is just, it's like a whack-a-mole, your head's coming up, right? So you ask about where things are going. I think this idea of lead funnel, and sorry, marketers, if you're on here right now, you have lead funnel, it's going to go away eventually. I think the first transition is over to an account-based funnel. Why? Because you're talking about buying units, right? You're talking about more than one buyer involved in the journey. If your product's $1,000 to sell, ignore everything I just said, but as soon as you're above, say, 10K, you're getting multiple buyers involved. And I see that going away and full engagement models taking over eventually, meaning I care entirely about how much engagement I'm creating over a progression. And I'm recognizing I only have so much control over that progression, but I can encourage people to engage more and more to the point that they go, yes, I'm interested. And we talked about in the context of, we said G2, Forrester's a good example. Like that tends to be a really important validation point. And if you're a large organization, well, you better be built in and understanding how often they're visiting the Forrester site, and understanding how, by the way, typically that's first party data. You're probably storing a lot of that on your site. But either way, I think you're going away from lead, you're going to account, then you're going to engagement.
Yeah, I think there's going to be probably also a pendulum swing a little bit back with buying committees. Because when you look about enterprise accounts, you're really, you're selling multiple solutions at the same time and different, but so there's going to be a lot more. And again, you need the master data set. Without this, all of this is impossible to do. But once that exists, there's going to be questions like, well, who were the participants in similar purchases before? And can I look at engagement, like you just noted, but only for those, because you're going to want to try to take away the noise. I think that's going to be a trend that's we're seeing more and more.
And what are we talking about today? We're talking about machine learning and how to apply it to help our buyers better navigate that journey. And to me, if I can have a fourth stage, I think it is engagement plus, in other words, engagement funnels plus machine learning. Correct. And I think that's, and I don't think that's months. I'm sorry, I don't think that's years. I think it's months.
Yeah, I think you're right. Because I think one of the things I'm seeing is just kind of recategorize, a marketing decision engine from our viewpoint is really about addressing the challenge that marketers have, which is that they have all these channels out there. All those channels are generating huge amounts of data, right? And the number of channels just keeps increasing And some channels need to be used. Some channels have direct, line of sight to ROI. Some don't, right? But you need to understand how they're all working. And how do you take this huge amount of data that's coming at you as a marketer and turn it into understanding about what's happening across these channels and what to do with it, right? I think a marketing decision engine, the first thing is like, first, let's consolidate it all into one place. You need a marketing data warehouse.
Yep.
So marketers, again, if you're not moving toward a marketing data warehouse, you need to start now, because that's where it's all going, right? Because there's just too much data. And then once you have the data, you need to consolidate it, create a consolidated data model. And then you need to be able to leverage different types of analytics on top of that data model to be able to pull out insights that depend on where the customers are and what you're looking for, right? Might need engagement, top of funnel. What's really happening up here? How do I understand what's moving things from A to B to C? Attribution, what really worked and what's my ROI? How do I talk with my CFO and tell them what's going on inside of this, right? Funnels to really help you understand like kind of your stages and how things break up, and potentially as a larger organization, different funnels that can all sit on top of it. So this is where things really break down if you're only using a standard marketing tech stack. I need 3 different funnels because I have 3 different marketing motions going on within my organization. I need a platform that can handle that. I need to have multiple ABM scoring and engagement models because I have different motions. I'm a $10 billion year organization. My pipeline, was $400 million, but that's broken up across 5 different types of business units and 17 different products. One funnel doesn't work. That you need multiple funnels that can handle it. One engagement model doesn't work because I have different things broken up. And that's where an MDE helps these organizations consolidate, figure out, and understand and how to work on that. The last thing I want to say is an MDA should be moving toward is how do we get that data back? That's kind of like my last question is if you think about now I've gotten an understanding, I know what's going on. What do I do with this data? How do I make it easier for a marketing? I threw this one, like this wasn't on our list here, but I threw this one at you guys. What do you do with this information? Because a lot of marketers say, hey, I've got this. I'm looking at these reports. This is great. What do I do with this? How do I activate it? How do I understand and move this back out into those platforms to operate on?
This is the debate, right? This is the debate. My opinion. I feel like there's so much value in helping marketers understand everything you just talked about, Eric. And I feel like there's this yawning gap between that understanding and the execution piece. And I think that the way that marketers, and I've been guilty of this too, the way marketers have filled that gap is to go, well, this worked in the past, or I'm going to use this playbook. And so as I'm looking at the world, I'm thinking we have so much more work to do in this piece of the understanding that the operating, the activation, or the orchestration piece, in many ways, like there's a lot of folks out there that are doing a really good job with that. So I think MDEs I think their role is to feed those activation or orchestration models ultimately, because guess what? This is the place we're not doing well as marketers, is that understanding piece.
Yeah. A lot of tools out there that can place ads and move ads around and do things. A lot of tools for sending out emails and doing those things. Not a lot of tools that are helping you understand when to do each one. And I think, and because so many of these tools are very focused on their area, I'm an email platform, so I have very good ways of managing and understanding what's happening with emails, but it has no understanding of what's happening with the ads. I'm running events over here. They're separated. If something isn't coordinating amongst these different channels and ways of working, there's no way of understanding how your whole business is working as a whole.
You need to be able to answer behavioral questions.
Yep.
Where are they in my engagement with my brand?
Yep.
And also, what have they already seen? And what is the next step? So it's a question of to whom, at what time, and what, right? And you're right, it could be paid for, an email in the same view.
I know we're almost out of time, but I want to bring this back to sort of the beginning of the conversation, Eric, which was talking about how you need to make sure you understand the subtlety of your channel as it applies to ROI. Because here's the thing, what we don't want to do is to abstract this whole idea of ROI and be like, well, it's too complex. It's not what we're saying. What we're saying is, if you can manage a multi-channel model well, your aggregate ROI should be a lot higher. But what you don't want to do is sort of chase the channel that creates the bottom line ROI for you.
Right.
What we're talking about here is the MDE is going to increase your ROI over time because you're able to create and understand and manage those subtleties well in a multi-channel model.
You get more efficient across you got multiple channels all kind of playing into a buyer group, and you get much more efficient about which channels are activated at different times of the buyer group, and your overall ROI gets way better, your efficiency gets better, and your conversion rates get better at the end of the day. So cool. Well, I think we'll end on that.
Cool.
Everybody, thank you for joining Funnel Lab Fridays. Next week we think we're bringing in
Bring a guest. Jordan Crawford, who is an advisor to a company called Clay. If you haven't checked out Clay, it's an amazing AI-driven tool. And we're going to be talking about the potential of AI to disrupt that funnel. So
yeah,
join us next week.
Stay tuned. Thank you.